Max Kellerman, I guess he on ESPN. I remember he was like on cable television in New York, I feel like local cable. I'm not sure. Maybe I'm mixing him up with somebody. But, and I feel like he was like a boxing guy. I don't know, really. Was he? And, but he just sort of unleashed this on ESPN, and good for him. He's talking about Colin Kaepernick, who, of course, was the former quarterback of the Niners, and who started, I guess was it mid last year?
Might have been the beginning of the season last year. I can't remember off the top of my head, I guess.
He would kneel during the singing of the national anthem as a protest about the way black people are treated in this country, particularly from law enforcement, but I think more broadly speaking. And this caught on around the country, and he got an enormous amount of support. Of course, he was ultimately cut from the team and has not been picked up by anybody since. And he was a good quarterback. I mean, Kellerman, well, this is what Kellerman does. He breaks it down in terms of like how Kellerman, as a guy who assesses professional football players, sort of saw this evolve. But, you know, Kaepernick, of course, is another one of those guys who you see people like Dave Rubin who are just out of their minds protecting the rights of this guy to protest. And, you know, when we hear about how, you know, these right-wingers have their ability to monetize their YouTube channels has been encumbered in some fashion, or that Milo Yiannopoulos can't go on a Mercer-funded trip to speak to students on a specific college campus. It is the world's greatest travesty. But the idea so out in the open of a guy who's being denied an ability to make money at his profession because of his protest doesn't garner the same attention, but it does from Max Kellerman here.
As we speak. Let the white guy say something about this, because I'm serious about that, because in this country, these things are seen far too often along racial lines. And if you see African-American people speaking about this, it feels as though that it's a racially segregated issue, which it is in many respects, unfortunately, because anyone who is socially conscious can see what's going on. Colin Kaepernick, and by the way, he led. Colin Kaepernick showed leadership, because a lot of others had followed his lead. Yes. But what happens when someone shows leadership, and this even you see it in labor relations? You know who never got paid? Kurt Flood. You know who got paid because of Kurt Flood? Everyone else. It is very possible what we're seeing now is the sacrifice of Colin Kaepernick's career on the altar of social and racial progress. And when he doesn't get a job, and I did not come out right away when they said blackballed, right? I did not come out right away. Max, preach. Yes, that's what's happening, because I thought he's looking for a starting job. Maybe he's seen as a bubble starter. You got to change your offense. He'll get a backup job. But now the results are in. The evidence is in. He does not have a starting job. He does not have a backup job. 31 of the owners are old white men, right? And precisely the issue that Colin Kaepernick is protesting is systematic racial injustice, which starts with the international slave trade, the Middle Passage, the institution of slavery, Reconstruction, Jim Crow, ongoing systematic oppression, which has created racial imbalance in terms of social justice. That's essentially what Colin Kaepernick is protesting. And the fact that then an almost exclusively white club of owners, because unless you believe that black people are intrinsically inferior at making money, I guess that's not true, right? Unless you believe that, then you also understand that the fact that the NFL is an all-white club at the ownership level, essentially, is a result of that injustice. Think of the irony that he doesn't have a job, partly because he's protesting the very reason that right now he doesn't have a job. Wow.
That's pretty well said. Now, for you youngins out there, Curtis Flood was, I I think he was an outfielder with the St. Louis Cardinals, who in like 1969 or 70, I think it was, he was going to be traded. And at that time, Major League Baseball players had very little say or ability to dictate their careers. Once you signed with a baseball team, you were basically, you were their chattel. And Flood sued because he was going to get traded. And I can't remember the details, but it has to do with the reserve clause. And Marvin Miller, I think at the time, was the head of the baseball, the player union. They ended up getting stuff like free agency and all of that. I think out of that, Flood I don't think got much. But the point being that Kaepernick is a victim of the very system that he was protesting, which I don't think is a coincidence. That's what happens. But it was well said. And it's good that this stuff is getting into the mainstream. Sports is inherently, is I think, far more political than we have made it out to be. And, you know, places like ESPN, they've got, at one point or another, they're going to have to just sort of like decide where they land. And it's one thing to make a political statement. It's another thing, I think, to be as insane as like a guy like, I can't even say his name, Kurt Schilling.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Kurt Schilling went the extra couple of miles. I liked how he framed it, though, to say specifically, let me get in as a white guy, which is a funny and provocative kind of thing, but then be like, no, actually, seriously, we specifically need to be articulating that.
Yes.
I think they should abolish ownership. If a town the size of Green Bay can run their own team,
no kidding.
and especially when they're the ones
Definitely.
who are making the stadiums, I think the
Exactly.
players should get really radical and say, fuck you guys.
Well, that's the other thing, too, that I talk with Waz about this a lot, that, like, yeah, even though they're really highly compensated, if you look at it from, you know, they're workers.
They're
I know,
salary
and
capped. They're literally
Zyron
salary
makes,
capped.
yeah, they have salary caps and the inequalities. I mean, they're obviously really privileged workers, but they're workers.
Hi, folks. Sam Seder here. We still need your help on our Patreon page. YouTube ads have come back, but not nearly as much as we had before. So if you can help us out, any little bit helps. Head over to our Patreon page right at this URL, and you'll help us keep helping you by making videos